When the letter finally arrived, it felt heavier than paper. It felt like hope. For 3 long years since the silver mine had tried to eat him alive and left him with a twisted leg, Marcus Brennan had been a ghost in his own town. The folks in Millfield, Nebraska, weren't cruel. They were worse. They were polite. They'd nod, give him a wide berth on the wooden sidewalk, and look right through him. They saw the crutches, not the man. His world had shrunk to the 4 walls of his cabin in the dusty corner of Henderson's general store where he kept the books. So he'd started writing letters. He wrote to women in newspaper ads, mail-order brides looking for a husband in the vast, empty prairie. He'd pour his heart out onto the page, describing his small but sturdy cabin, his steady work, his dream of a family. He was honest and kind. But then he'd get to the last paragraph, the one about the mining accident, the one that left him walking with, as he put it, a little help. The replies never came. 3 letters sent, 3 silent rejections. But this new ad from a Miss Clara Whitfield in Denver felt different. She didn't ask for a strong man to protect her. She asked for an honest husband for companionship and shared dreams. Companionship. That was a word Marcus hadn't allowed himself to think about in years. So he wrote a 4th letter, his handwriting clumsy, but his words true. He told her everything, even about the leg. He sealed the envelope, and for the first time in 1,000 days, he let a dangerous little sliver of hope into his heart. And then, a miracle. A letter came back. From Denver, with Clara Whitfield's name on it. His hands shook so badly he could barely tear it open. He expected a polite refusal. He braced for the familiar sting of pity. But the words on the page made his breath catch in his throat. "Dear Mr. Brennan," it read, "your honesty has touched me deeply. I too believe that a marriage should be a partnership of souls, not just a contract of convenience. Your cabin sounds like a haven, and your dreams sound much like my own. I have accepted your proposal. I will be on the Tuesday stagecoach. Yours, Clara." He read it again, and again. The words danced in front of his eyes. She was coming. She had read about his leg, about his brokenness, and she had chosen him anyway. The news spread through Millfield like a prairie fire. Marcus Brennan was getting a mail-order bride. The whispers in the general store changed from pity to surprise, then to a grudging respect. For a week, Marcus walked on air, the constant ache in his leg almost forgotten. He cleaned his cabin until it shone, bought new curtains from Henderson, and even practiced smiling in his small, cracked mirror. Finally, Tuesday arrived. He stood at the stagecoach stop, his best shirt on, his hair slicked back. The entire town, it seemed, had found a reason to be on Main Street, pretending not to watch. The stagecoach thundered into town, a cloud of dust billowing behind it. The door opened. A woman stepped out, tall and weary, dressed in simple brown traveling clothes, dark hair, tired eyes. But it wasn't Clara. Marcus's practiced smile faltered. He looked past her, into the coach, expecting to see another passenger. There was no one. The driver was already unloading a single battered trunk. The woman looked around, her eyes scanning the crowd, a confused and anxious expression on her face. Her gaze finally landed on Marcus, the only man standing alone waiting. She took a hesitant step toward him. "Mr. Brennan?" she asked, her voice quiet but clear. Marcus was confused. "No," he started to say, thinking she had him mistaken for someone else. But then he stopped. How did she know his name? I'm looking for a Mr. Hayes," she said, her confusion deepening. "William Hayes, a rancher. He was supposed to meet me." Henderson, the store owner, stepped forward, wiping his hands on his apron. "Ma'am, there's no rancher named Hayes around these parts. Not for 50 miles, at least." The woman's face went pale. She swayed on her feet, clutching a small travel bag to her chest. "But the letters. He wrote to me for weeks. He sent the ticket." And that's when Marcus noticed it, the handwriting on the tag of her trunk. It was delicate, familiar. It was the same handwriting from Clara Whitfield's letter. The woman suddenly collapsed, her bag spilling its contents across the dusty street. The townspeople gasped and rushed forward. But Marcus was frozen, his mind racing, trying to put the pieces of an impossible puzzle together. One ad, 2 women, 2 different names. and a ghost of a rancher who didn't exist. Something was terribly wrong in Millfield, and he was standing right in the middle of it. The woman's name was Abigail Moore. As Marcus and Henderson helped her into a chair inside the general store, the story spilled out. She was a widow twice over. She'd answered an ad from a rancher named William Hayes, traveled for 3 days from Kansas, only to find out he was a phantom. She was stranded with no money and nowhere to go. The townspeople murmured their sympathies, but Marcus couldn't speak. He was staring at the scattered contents of her bag. Among the simple practical items, a brush, a change of clothes, a worn Bible, was a stack of letters tied with a blue ribbon. Letters from the phantom rancher, William Hayes, and the handwriting was identical to the letter in his own pocket, the letter from Clara Whitfield. "Let me help you with that," he said, his voice hoarse, as he knelt to gather her things. His fingers brushed against the letters, and an icy dread washed over him. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a design, a cruel, elaborate trap. But who was the target? Him, or this exhausted widow, or both? "You can stay at Mrs. Kowalski's boarding house," Henderson was saying. "She's always looking for help. It's not much, but it's a roof and meals." Abigail nodded, her face a mask of weary gratitude. "Thank you. You're all very kind." Her eyes met Marcus's, and for a second, he saw a flash of the same bone-deep loneliness he saw in his own reflection every morning. He made a decision. "I can show you the way," he offered, "and help you with your trunk." As they walked the short distance to the boarding house, Marcus's mind was a whirlwind. Why would someone use 2 different names to lure 2 different people to the same small town on the same day? What did they want? He looked at Abigail, walking beside him, her shoulders slumped in defeat. She seemed as much a victim as he was. But what if she wasn't? What if she was part of the trap? "You said you're a widow?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Yes," she said, her voice flat. "My first husband died of a fever. The second, an accident with a horse." She looked at his crutches. "I know something about accidents." Her honesty was disarming, but the doubt lingered. When they reached the boarding house, a formidable Polish woman named Mrs. Kowalski came out, wiping her hands on her apron. Her sharp eyes took in Abigail's dusty clothes and Marcus's crutches in a single, disapproving glance. "Henderson sent you," she said, her voice thick with an accent. "He says you need work. You look strong enough, but him," she pointed a thumb at Marcus, "you should stay away from that one. The Brennans have a darkness that follows them." The mind didn't take him by accident. It was calling him home. Marcus flinched as if struck. The old superstition, the town folklore that a Brennan from every generation was claimed by the silver mine, a price for the family's prosperity generations ago. He'd always dismissed it as nonsense. But hearing it now, after the impossible events of the day, it sent a shiver down his spine. "That's just old stories," Marcus said, his voice tight. Mrs. Kowalski just grunted. "Some stories are written in blood." She ushered Abigail inside, leaving Marcus alone on the porch. He felt 100 pairs of eyes on him, the whole town watching, whispering. He was no longer just the town cripple. He was part of a mystery. He turned to limp home, his mind reeling. The phantom rancher, the 2 letters, the shared handwriting. And now a family curse. Nothing made sense. That night, unable to sleep, he pulled out Clara's letter again. He stared at the elegant script until his eyes burned. There had to be a clue, something he'd missed. And then he saw it, a tiny, almost invisible mark next to the signature. It wasn't a smudge, it was a symbol, a small stylized drawing of a bird, a raven maybe. He'd seen that symbol before. He scrambled to his father's old trunk, pulling out a dusty box of family papers. He dug through old deeds and letters until he found it, a map of the old silver mine, drawn by his great-grandfather. In the corner next to the Brennan family name was the same small stylized raven. His blood ran cold. Clara Whitfield, whoever she was, knew about his family's connection to the mine. The letter wasn't a proposal, it was a summons. And Abigail Moore, the woman with the same letters from a phantom rancher, had just walked right into the middle of it. He had to warn her. The next morning he went to the boarding house. He found Abigail in the kitchen, peeling potatoes, already put to work by Mrs. Kowalski. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and urgent. He showed her the letters, his and hers, side by side. He showed her the identical handwriting, the phantom names. Her eyes widened in disbelief. "What does this mean?" she whispered. "I don't know," he admitted, "but it's not a coincidence. Someone wanted us both here, in Millfield at the same time, and I think it has something to do with my family, and the mine." Before she could respond, Mrs. Kowalski burst into the kitchen. "I told you to stay away from him," she hissed at Abigail. "You think he is a good man? Ask him what is buried under his cabin. Ask him what his father did." Marcus stared at her, stunned. "What are you talking about? My father was a farmer." "Your father was a keeper of secrets," she spat. "Dark secrets that should have died with him. Now go! Get out of my house before you bring your family's curse down on all of us." She chased him out with a broom, leaving him standing in the street, his mind reeling from her words. Buried under his cabin? Keeper of secrets? He hobbled home as fast as his crutches would carry him, his heart pounding with a terrible new question. Was his entire life everything he thought he knew about his own father? A lie? He had to know. He grabbed a shovel and went to the small root cellar beneath his cabin. The floor was hard-packed dirt. He started digging. Hours passed, his shoulders ached, and his legs screamed in protest. But he didn't stop. Finally, the shovel hit something hard, not a rock, wood. He cleared away the dirt, his hands trembling. It was a small wooden chest, bound in iron straps. It was locked. He smashed the lock with the back of his shovel and lifted the heavy lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a leather-bound ledger and a silver pistol. He opened the ledger. The first page was in his father's familiar handwriting, but what it said made the world drop out from under him. It was a confession to murder. And the name of the man his father had killed 30 years ago was Henry Moore, Abigail's late husband. The name stared back at him from the page, a ghost from a past he never knew existed. Henry Moore. It couldn't be. Abigail's second husband, the one killed by a horse, had been named Henry Moore. It had to be a coincidence, a cruel, impossible coincidence. But the ledger told a different story. His father, a man Marcus remembered as quiet and kind, had been part of a vigilante group, a secret cabal of Millfield's founding families, the Brennans, the Hendersons, the Pattersons. They called themselves the Guardians of the Prairie, and their mission was to protect the town from outsiders and threats. But their methods were brutal. The ledger was a record of their justice, warnings, beatings, banishments, and executions. Henry Moore, according to the ledger, was a grifter who had tried to blackmail the Guardians, threatening to expose their illegal claim to the silver mine. So they'd taken him out into the prairie and silenced him forever. My hand was the one that pulled the trigger, his father had written. May God forgive me. Marcus felt sick. His father, a killer. Henderson, the friendly store owner, was the son of another guardian. The whole town was built on a foundation of secrets and blood. And Abigail? Where did she fit in? Was she Henry Moore's widow, come for revenge? Was she his daughter? Or was it truly just a horrific coincidence of names? His mind spun, trying to find a version of reality that made sense. But every path led to a darker place. He had to talk to her. He had to know the truth. He found her by the creek on the edge of town, skipping stones across the water, her face clouded with thought. Your second husband, he began, his voice shaking. Henry Moore. Tell me about him. Abigail stiffened. A shadow passed over her face. What about him? He was a failed farmer with a taste for whiskey and a mean streak. He got what he deserved from that horse. Why do you ask? When did you marry him? 6 years ago. Why are you interrogating me? She asked, her voice sharp. Marcus's heart sank. The dates didn't line up. The murder in the ledger was 30 years ago. This Henry Moore couldn't be the same man. It was a coincidence, after all. The relief was so profound it almost made him dizzy. But the mystery of the letters, of why they were both brought to Millfield, remained. I found something, he said, his voice low. Something my father hid. He told her about the ledger, about the guardians, about the murder of a man who shared her husband's name. As he spoke, Abigail's face went from suspicion to shock, and then to a chilling, dawning horror. The stories he told, she whispered, her eyes wide. I thought they were just drunken ramblings. What stories? Henry. My Henry. He always bragged about his father, also named Henry. He said his father was a clever man, a card sharp who came to Nebraska to make his fortune, but disappeared under mysterious circumstances. He said one day he'd find out what happened and make the people responsible pay. The pieces clicked into place with sickening finality. Abigail hadn't married the man from the ledger. She had married his son, a son who knew his father had been murdered in Millfield, a son who was looking for revenge. He was investigating, Marcus realized aloud. His marriage to you, his life in Kansas, it was all a cover. He was planning to come here. The horse, Abigail said, her voice trembling. The accident. Everyone said it was a freak thing, but I always wondered. It happened right after he received a letter with a Nebraska postmark. They looked at each other, the same terrible thought reflected in their eyes. The Guardians were still active. They had found out Henry Moore Jr. was getting close, so they silenced him, just as they had silenced his father. But that doesn't make any sense, Marcus said, thinking fast. If they killed him to keep him away, why would they lure you here? And me? Unless they didn't kill him, Abigail whispered. Unless the letter he got was a warning or an invitation. It was a dizzying thought. What if Henry was still alive? What if the Guardians, the secret cabal running Millfield, had brought him here, and they needed Abigail and Marcus for some reason? The letters, Abigail said suddenly, her eyes lighting up with a new idea. Clara Whitfield and William Hayes. What if those weren't just random names? What if they're connected to the other families? The Pattersons, the Bradleys? They had to get back to the ledger. But when they returned to Marcus's cabin, the door was splintered, hanging off its hinges. The room was ransacked, and the chest with the ledger and the pistol was gone. They weren't alone in this. Someone had been watching them. Someone who knew they had found the secret. What do we do now? Abigail whispered, panic creeping into her voice. They made a mistake, Marcus said, his voice hardening with a resolve he hadn't felt in years. They took the ledger, but they don't know that I read it. I remember the names, and I know who has it. There was only one person who knew Marcus had been at the boarding house. Only one person who could have followed him home and known he had found the secret. The one person who had warned Abigail to stay away from him in the first place. Mrs. Kowalski. The boarding house was quiet when they approached, the windows dark except for a single lamp glowing in the kitchen. The front door was unlocked. A trap? Maybe. But they had no other choice. The ledger was their only proof, their only weapon. They slipped inside, moving like ghosts through the silent house. They could hear Mrs. Kowalski humming a low, mournful tune in the kitchen. The sound was eerie, chilling. The floorboards creaked under Marcus's weight, and the humming stopped. I know you are here, Mrs. Kowalski called out, her voice calm, without a trace of surprise. Come into the light. They found her sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of tea steaming in front of her. The iron-strapped chest was on the table. You took it, Marcus said, his hand instinctively reaching for the crutch he leaned on, gripping it like a club. I saved it, she corrected. For you. From them. Who's them? Abigail demanded. The men who run this town, the sons of the Guardians, Mrs. Kowalski said, her eyes dark with ancient grief. Henderson, Bradley, Patterson. They know you found the ledger. They were coming to kill you both and take it. I got here first. Marcus stared at her, his mind struggling to keep up. Why? Why would you help us? Because your father was not the monster that book makes him out to be, she said, her gaze fixed on Marcus. And because my family owes a debt to yours. She then told them a story that changed everything. She wasn't just a Polish immigrant. Her family had been in Nebraska for generations. They were native, from a tribe that had been driven off this land when the silver was discovered. But Marcus's great-grandmother had helped them, given them shelter, saved them from starvation. The Kowalski name was an alias, a shield to help them survive in a white man's world. My people have watched this town for a long time, she said. We know its secrets. The Guardians did not just kill that grifter, Henry Moore I. They murdered my grandfather for trying to reclaim this land. It is all connected. She looked at Abigail. And you, child, you are the final piece of their puzzle. What do you mean? Abigail asked. Your first husband, Mrs. Kowalski said. The one who died of a fever. What was his family name? Jenkins, Abigail said, confused. Why? A slow, grim smile spread across Mrs. Kowalski's face. The Jenkins family were the original surveyors of this land. They drew the first maps before the silver was found, before the Guardians stole it. Maps that showed where the richest veins of silver were. Maps that the Guardians have been searching for 50 years. The room fell silent, the weight of the revelation pressing down on them. Abigail's first marriage wasn't a random tragedy. It was part of the plan. Henry Moore, Jr., Marcus breathed, putting it all together. He didn't marry you by accident. He knew who you were. He knew your first husband's family had the maps. He married you to get them. He never found them, Abigail whispered, her face pale. I swear, I would have known. But he thought you knew where they were, Mrs. Kowalski said. And now the Guardians think so too. That is why they brought you here. They lured Marcus with the promise of a wife to get him out of that cabin so they could search for the ledger. And they lured you with the promise of a husband to get you to Millfield so they could force you to tell them where the maps are. Suddenly, the front door crashed open. Henderson stood there, his friendly shopkeeper face twisted into a mask of cold fury. The blacksmith, Tom Bradley, stood behind him, holding a heavy hammer. Evening, ladies, Henderson said, his eyes locking on the chest. Marcus, I believe you have something that belongs to us. Mrs. Kowalski slowly stood up, placing herself between them and the table. This curse ends tonight. It's not a curse, Henderson sneered. It's a legacy, and we aim to protect it. Bradley took a step forward, swinging the hammer menacingly. Give us the book and the girl. No one has to get hurt. You're mistaken, Marcus said, his voice ringing with a newfound authority. He took a step forward, positioning himself next to Mrs. Kowalski. My father and your fathers, they were murderers and thieves, but their legacy of fear dies with them. Henderson laughed. Brave words for a cripple. What are you going to do? Bore us to death with your bookkeeping? In that moment, something inside Marcus shifted. For 3 years, he had let his injury define him. He had seen himself as broken, as less than a man. But looking at the ugly greed on Henderson's face, he realized his strength wasn't in his legs. It was in his mind. The same mind that could see patterns in numbers could see the patterns in this conspiracy. You need the maps to find the silver, Marcus said, his voice steady and calm. And you think Abigail has them, but you're wrong. Oh yeah, Bradley grunted. And how would you know? Because I know where they are, Marcus said. The lie was sudden, instinctive, born of desperation. But as soon as he said it, he saw a flicker of uncertainty in Henderson's eyes. He had their attention. They're not on any paper, Marcus continued, the story building in his mind, weaving itself out of thin air. They were memorized, passed down from father to son. My father taught them to me before he died. He knew one day you'd come for them. It was a wild gamble, but it was all he had. Henderson stared at him, his mind working. You're bluffing. Am I? Marcus said, leaning on his crutch. There's a vein of silver so rich it could make you all kings. It runs right under this town, but only a Brennan knows the way in. That was our insurance policy, the price for our silence. He saw the greed warring with suspicion on their faces. They wanted to believe him. All right, Brennan, Henderson said slowly. Show us. First, Marcus countered, you let the women go. Unharmed. Henderson hesitated, then nodded. Fine. But if this is a trick, I'll burn this whole town to the ground with you in it. Mrs. Kowalski and Abigail exchanged a look. Abigail gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Trust me. As they were herded out the door, into the dark street, Abigail stumbled, dropping her small shawl. As Henderson bent to pick it up, his eyes fell on something on the floor, A single muddy boot print that didn't belong to any of them. It was fresh. Someone else was in the house. Suddenly a voice came from the shadows of the parlor, a voice that made Abigail freeze in terror, a voice she had prayed she would never hear again. "Hello, darling," it said. "Did you miss me?" A man stepped out of the darkness. He was handsome, charming, and smiling a predator's smile. It was Henry Moore, her dead husband. The world tilted on its axis. Abigail stared, her heart trying to hammer its way out of her chest. It was him, not a ghost, not a memory. Henry Moore, in the flesh, looking healthier and more dangerous than she had ever seen him. "Henry?" she breathed, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. "The one and only," he said with a theatrical bow. He ignored Henderson and Bradley, his eyes fixed on Abigail. "The horse story was a nice touch, I thought. Gave me the time I needed to let things settle here, to find my new partners." He gestured to Henderson. It was clear now. This wasn't a confrontation. It was a business meeting, and Marcus had just walked into the middle of it. Henry wasn't the Guardian's enemy, he was their new associate. "You knew?" Marcus demanded, looking at Henderson. "You knew he was alive?" "Business is business, Brennan," Henderson said with a shrug. "He had information we needed. We had resources he could use. It's a partnership." "He knew where to find the ledger," Henry explained, his smile never wavering. "And I knew that my dear, clever wife's family were the key to the real prize, the Jenkins maps." He finally looked at Marcus. "Your little bluff was cute, Brennan, but we don't need your memorized map. We just need her." Bradley grabbed Abigail's arm. "Where are they, girl? Where did your family hide the maps?" "I don't know," as she cried, struggling against his grip. "I've told you I don't know anything about any maps." "Oh, I think you do," Henry said, his voice turning silky and cold. He stepped closer, tracing a line along her arm with his finger. "You just don't know you know." He pulled up the sleeve of her dress. There, on her forearm, were the small, round scars Marcus had seen before. The ones she'd told him were cigarette burns. But in the lamplight, he saw them for what they were. They weren't random. They were a pattern, a constellation of marks that looked like a map. "The Jenkins women were clever," Henry said, his voice filled with admiration. "They knew paper could be burned, and memories could fade. So they passed the map down in a way no one would ever think to look. Branded onto the skin of their daughters, generation after generation. A birthmark, they called it, a family legacy." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. The abuse hadn't been random acts of drunken violence. It had been a systematic torture, designed to mark her, to turn her own body into the treasure map he was hunting. "You're a monster," Abigail whispered, her face ashen. "I'm a visionary," Henry corrected. "Now we're going to the mine. You," he pointed at Marcus, "are going to show us the entrance your family used. And she," he smiled at Abigail, "is going to show us where to dig." They were trapped. Mrs. Kowalski stood frozen, her face a mask of fury. Marcus's mind raced, searching for an escape, for any advantage. His bluff had failed. His strength was useless. "The ledger," Mrs. Kowalski said suddenly, her voice cutting through the tension. Everyone turned to look at her. "You can have the maps," she said, looking directly at Henderson. "But the ledger is ours, a record of our history, our dead. It is not for you." Henderson hesitated. The ledger was proof of generations of crime, but the silver was the real prize. "Fine," he agreed. "Take the book. We want the mine." Mrs. Kowalski walked slowly to the table and picked up the heavy ledger. She held it clutched to her chest like a sacred text. As they were forced out into the night and marched toward the old mine entrance on the edge of town, Marcus felt a profound despair. He had failed. He had brought them all to this point, and now Abigail was going to pay the price. The mine entrance was a dark, gaping wound in the hillside. The air smelled of damp earth and decay. "All right, Brennan," Henderson said, shoving him forward. "Your family's private entrance. Where is it?" Marcus looked at the rock face, his mind blank. His bluff was being called. This was the end. But then Mrs. Kowalski spoke again, her voice low and steady beside him. "The raven flies at midnight." It was a code, a message. Marcus looked at her, confused. She subtly tilted her head toward the ledger she was still holding. Suddenly, he remembered the raven symbol on his great-grandfather's map, the one that matched the mark on the fake letter from Clara Whitfield. He understood. "This way," Marcus said, pointing to a section of the rock wall that looked no different from the rest. He began describing the complex path from the fake map he had invented, stalling for time, praying he understood Mrs. Kowalski's plan. As Henry and the others were distracted, trying to follow his instructions, Mrs. Kowalski opened the ledger. She wasn't reading it. She was tearing out the pages, one by one, pages filled with the sins of their fathers. "What are you doing?" Bradley growled, noticing what was happening. "Reclaiming what is ours," she said calmly. And with a swift, sudden movement, she threw the ledger into Henry's hands and shoved Abigail toward Marcus. "Run!" she screamed. At the same moment, she pulled a small pouch from her dress. With a flick of her wrist, she threw a fine black powder into the air. The powder ignited from the flame of their lanterns, creating a blinding flash and a deafening roar. Flash powder, a simple old trick. But in the enclosed space, it was devastating. Henderson, Bradley, and Henry screamed, clutching their eyes. In the chaos, Marcus grabbed Abigail, and they scrambled away into the darkness. But Mrs. Kowalski did not follow. She stood her ground, a fearless silhouette against the mine entrance. From the ledger she had thrown to Henry, she had kept one thing, the silver pistol. A shot rang out in the night, then another, followed by a man's scream of agony. Marcus and Abigail didn't look back. They ran, plunging into the labyrinth of rocks and trees, the sounds of the fight fading behind them. They had escaped, but the cost was terrifyingly unknown. They were alone, hunted, and their only ally had just sacrificed herself for them. They ran until their lungs burned and the sounds of shouting faded into the prairie wind. They found shelter in a shallow cave Marcus remembered from his childhood, a small recess hidden behind a curtain of wild vines. There, shivering from cold and shock, they huddled together in the darkness. "She saved us," Abigail whispered, her voice trembling. "Mrs. Kowalski." She faced them alone. "She's a warrior," Marcus said, his own voice thick with emotion. He thought of the pistol, of the screams. He didn't know if she had survived, but he knew she had bought them time. But time for what? They were fugitives. Henry and the Guardians owned the town. There was no one to turn to, nowhere to run. "The ledger," Abigail said, her mind piecing things together in the dark. "She didn't give Henry the real ledger." Marcus froze. "What?" When she threw it to him, it was lighter, thinner, and the pages she was tearing out. She was putting them inside her dress. Mrs. Kowalski had created a decoy. She had given Henry a hollowed-out book and kept the incriminating pages, the proof of the murders, hidden on her person. It was an act of incredible foresight and bravery. "But where is she now?" Marcus wondered aloud. A new thought, cold and sharp, cut through his despair. What if Mrs. Kowalski's sacrifice wasn't just about letting them escape? What if it was about sending them somewhere specific? "The trading post," he said suddenly. "What trading post?" "There's an old abandoned trading post about a mile from here. It was used by the first settlers. My father showed it to me once. He said it was a place for people who needed to disappear." He remembered Mrs. Kowalski's words. "My people have watched this town for a long time. It wasn't just a settler's post. It was a safe house. They had a destination, a sliver of hope." They moved under the cover of darkness, Marcus navigating by the stars, his knowledge of the land, a skill he'd once thought useless, now their most valuable asset. The pain in his leg was a raging fire, but he pushed it down, fueled by adrenaline and the desperate need to protect Abigail. They found the trading post at dawn. It was a ruin, barely more than a stone foundation and a few crumbling walls, but there was a cellar door hidden beneath a tangle of overgrown bushes. It was unlocked. They descended into the cool darkness. The cellar was small but dry, stocked with supplies, blankets, canned food, water. And someone was waiting for them, not Mrs. Kowalski. It was a young man, no older than 20, with the same sharp eyes and proud bearing as the old woman. "She sent you," the young man said. It wasn't a question. "I am her grandson, Joseph. She told me you might come." "Is she—" Abigail couldn't finish the sentence. She is safe, Joseph said. Wounded, but alive. She drew them away, east. She knew they would follow her, the woman with the ledger pages. She wanted them as far away from here as possible, to give you time. Time for what? Marcus asked. Joseph gestured to a dusty table in the corner of the cellar. On it, laid out with care, were a series of old yellowed parchments, the Jenkins maps. Mrs. Kowalski has had these for years, Joseph explained. Your first husband's family, Abigail, they entrusted them to my people for safekeeping generations ago. They knew the Guardians would come for them eventually. Abigail stared at the maps, her mind reeling. The legacy she never knew she had, the source of so much pain, was right here in front of her. Henry was right about one thing, Joseph continued. The maps show where the silver is, but they also show something else, something the Guardians have forgotten. He pointed to a symbol on the map, the same stylized raven from Marcus's family papers. The raven was not the mark of the Brennan family. It was the mark of the mine's deepest, most unstable shaft, the one they had called the Maw. My ancestors knew this land. They knew the mine was a death trap, that it was prone to collapse. A plan began to form in Marcus's mind, audacious and incredibly dangerous. They want the silver, Marcus said, thinking aloud. Henry and Henderson. They'll follow the map on Abigail's arm, the one Henry created. But it's an incomplete map. It won't lead them to the treasure. It will lead them into a trap. What are you saying? Abigail asked. I'm saying we don't run, Marcus said, his eyes blazing with a fierce new light. We go back. We give them what they want. We lead them right into the heart of the mine, to the most dangerous point, and we bury them in it. It was a plan born of desperation, a true suicide mission. They would be walking back into the lion's den. It's too risky, Abigail said, but there was no conviction in her voice. She looked at the scars on her arm, the map of her pain. She looked at Marcus, the man who saw her as a partner, not a prize. She knew he was right. Running would never end this. We will help, Joseph said. My people know the hills. We can create a diversion. Give you a chance to get inside the mine undetected. Over the next hour, they laid out the plan. It was a tapestry of interlocking risks. Joseph's people would start a fire on the far side of town, drawing most of Henderson's men away. Under the cover of that confusion, Marcus and Abigail would return to the mine. They would let themselves be captured. Then Marcus would use his expertise, his intimate knowledge of mining and geology, the very profession that had broken his body, to bring the mountain down on their enemies. He would turn his greatest weakness into their most powerful weapon. As they prepared to leave, Abigail stopped him. She took his face in her hands. Marcus, she said, her voice filled with a powerful emotion he had never heard from her before. This isn't about revenge. Not for me. This is about us. About building a life where we don't have to look over our shoulders. No matter what happens in there, what we have found together, it's real. He looked at this woman who had survived so much, who had been marked and betrayed, and saw not a victim, but a survivor of incredible strength. In that moment, he knew he wasn't just fighting for his own life. He was fighting for hers, for the future they had dared to dream of. I know, he said, his voice steady. Let's go finish this. They walked out of the cellar and into the fading light, two broken people made whole by a shared purpose. They were walking back toward death, but for the first time in their lives, they were not afraid. The fire lit up the night sky to the west, a brilliant orange beacon of chaos. Just as Joseph had promised, shouts and alarm bells echoed from Millfield as the townsfolk and Henderson's men rushed to fight the blaze. The diversion was working. Under the cover of the confusion, Marcus and Abigail slipped back to the mine entrance. The scene of the fight was deserted, the air still thick with the smell of gunpowder. They didn't have to wait long. A single lantern appeared, cutting through the darkness. It was Henry, and he was alone. He must have doubled back, too clever to be fooled by the fire. I knew you'd come back, he said, his voice calm, but his eyes burned with triumph. You can't run from destiny, Abigail. This isn't destiny, she said, her voice cold and steady. It's a reckoning. Henry laughed. I like this fire in you. It's a shame I'll have to put it out. He gestured with his pistol. Inside, both of you. Henderson is waiting. They were led deep into the mine, the lantern light casting dancing, monstrous shadows on the tunnel walls. They found Henderson and Bradley in a large cavern, their faces grim. It was clear from the tension that Mrs. Kowalski had wounded one of them. Bradley's arm was in a makeshift sling. So the cripple's map was a fake, Henderson sneered. Doesn't matter. We have the real one now. He grabbed Abigail's arm, holding the lantern close to the scars. Let's get to it. They forced her to lead them deeper, following the cruel map branded on her skin. Marcus watched, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. He needed them to get to a specific place, the chamber his great-grandfather had marked with the raven. The maw. He recognized the signs as they walked, the subtle shifts in the rock, the timber supports that were older, more strained. His miner's instincts screamed at him that this entire section was unstable. Finally they arrived. It was a massive cavern, the ceiling lost in the darkness above. In the center, a deep chasm split the floor. This is it, Henry said, his voice hushed with awe. He pointed to a ledge on the far side of the chasm, the richest vein in the territory. The Jenkins maps are very specific. There's no way across, Bradley grunted. There is, Marcus said, speaking for the first time. The old mine carts. The track runs right over the chasm. He pointed to a rusted ore cart and a decaying track that spanned the darkness. It should hold your weight, if you're brave enough to try. He was counting on their greed. He knew the track was rotten, that the supports were ready to give. It was the centerpiece of his plan. Henderson and Henry exchanged a look. The lure of the silver was too strong. You first, Henderson said, shoving Marcus toward the cart. You and the girl. If it holds you, it'll hold us. It was a complication Marcus hadn't anticipated. He had planned to send them across, then sever the track. Now he and Abigail were being forced into their own trap. There was no choice. He helped Abigail into the cart, his mind racing. The plan had changed. Now it was about survival. The cart groaned in protest as he pushed it out over the chasm. It swayed precariously, the wheels screaming against the rusted track. Below them, there was only blackness. They made it to the other side, the cart settling with a heavy thud. See? Safe as houses, Henry called across the chasm. He and Henderson climbed into a second cart, while Bradley, with his injured arm, remained behind. As they began to pull themselves across, hand over hand on a greasy rope, Marcus knew it was now or never. Abigail, he whispered, the support timbers, the ones holding this ledge up. Look for the ones marked with a white X. My father showed me. They're the load-bearing post for this whole chamber. While Henry and Henderson were distracted, their backs to them, Marcus and Abigail moved to the massive wooden beams that held the ceiling aloft. He used his crutch as a lever, putting all his weight against a critical joint. Abigail threw her body against another. The wood groaned. Dust rained down from the ceiling. What are you doing? Bradley shouted from the other side, realizing what was happening. The cart carrying Henry and Henderson was halfway across the chasm when the first timber splintered with a sound like a gunshot. The ledge beneath their feet trembled. Stop them! Henderson screamed. Bradley raised his pistol, but it was too late. With a final, desperate heave, Marcus and Abigail brought their combined weight against the main support. It shattered. The entire cavern began to collapse in on itself. The track buckled, and the cart carrying Henderson and Henry plunged screaming into the darkness of the chasm. Rocks hailed down from the ceiling. The ledge they were on began to crumble, breaking away into the abyss. This way! Marcus yelled, grabbing Abigail's hand. He pulled her toward a small dark tunnel he knew was there. An old air shaft, barely big enough for a man to crawl through. They scrambled inside just as the cavern behind them gave way in a final, deafening roar, sealing the entrance, burying Henry and the Guardian's legacy under 1,000,000 tons of rock and earth. They were alive. They were trapped. The air shaft was their only hope. It was a long, dark, terrifying crawl toward a faint glimmer of light and the promise of air. They emerged hours later, covered in dust and grime, into the pre-dawn light on the far side of the mountain, miles from Millfield. They were free. The town they looked back on was a different place. Its dark heart had been buried in the mine. Its secrets were silenced forever. They found Joseph and awaiting Mrs. Kowalski, her arm bandaged but her eyes fierce and proud. The ledger pages were safe. "It is over," she said. "What now?" Abigail asked, looking at Marcus. He took her hand. His leg throbbed. His body was battered, but his spirit soared. He had faced down his ghosts and won. "Now," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face, "we build something new." Months later, the world had changed. The story of the mine's collapse was told as a tragic accident, the greedy men getting their just desserts. With the ledger pages as leverage, Mrs. Kowalski and her people were able to reclaim their ancestral lands. The town of Millfield, free from the Guardian's grip, began to heal. And on a small plot of land overlooking the prairie, Marcus and Abigail built their home. One day the doctor from the new, nearby settlement came to visit. He was a young man, trained in the latest techniques from back east. He examined Marcus's leg. "I can fix this," the doctor said. "It will be a painful surgery, a long recovery, but I can give you back your mobility. I can make you whole." Marcus looked at Abigail, who was now visibly pregnant with their first child. He looked at the home they had built with their own hands. He thought of the man he used to be, the ghost who was defined by what he had lost. And he thought of the man he was now, defined by the love he had found. "Thank you, doctor," Marcus said, his voice clear and strong, "but I'm already whole." He had learned that a person's strength isn't measured by how they stand, but by what they stand for. And he was standing, right where he belonged, with his family, ready for the adventure of a life built not on secrets and silver, but on courage and love. If you enjoyed this story of survival and redemption, do the strange, dark, and mysterious a favor and hit that subscribe button, because you never know what secrets are buried just beneath the surface.